It was the first week of winter when the new girl arrived at the academy. The wind outside carried the sound of dry leaves brushing across the old courtyard, and inside the hallway smelled faintly of varnished wood and music sheets. The students were preparing for their midterm performances, some humming scales, others whispering nervously about who might win the yearly scholarship. Everyone already knew each other, except for the quiet girl who stood by the doorway, clutching her worn backpack and looking a little lost. She didn't say much that first day. She spoke politely, almost too softly, and her eyes wandered around the grand piano in the middle of the room as if it were something sacred. Her clothes were simple, not the kind you'd expect at a prestigious music academy where most students came from wealthy families. She found a seat in the corner, opened her small notebook, and started writing something no one could see. The teacher entered a few minutes later. He was known for being strict but fair, a man who believed that music was discipline first and passion second. The student straightened immediately when he walked in. His sharp eyes scanned the room and stopped on the unfamiliar face. "You must be the new student," he said in his deep voice. She nodded quickly. "What's your name?" he asked. She told him, and he gave a short nod before continuing with class. He didn't think much about her after that. New students came every year, some full of promise, others gone within weeks. Still, there was something about her calmness that stayed in the back of his mind, though he couldn't explain why. During the lesson, each student was asked to practice a short piece on the piano, while the rest of the class observed. Some played beautifully, others stumbled, and the teacher offered his usual comments, sharp but useful. When it was the new girl's turn, she hesitated. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a few seconds before she began. Her playing was clumsy, uncertain, as if she wasn't sure of the rhythm. The teacher frowned slightly. He listened for less than a minute before asking her to stop. "You'll need a lot of practice," he said in a flat tone. She nodded again without a word. Some students exchanged quiet smiles, assuming she was just another beginner. But the teacher noticed something small, barely visible, the way her left hand adjusted mid-note, correcting herself not because she knew the sheet by memory, but because she seemed to feel the music. It was subtle, but it stayed in his thoughts long after class ended. Over the next few days, the girl kept mostly to herself. She spent breaks sitting near the piano, writing in that same small notebook. A few curious students tried to start a conversation, asking if she liked pop music or classical, but she answered with short sentences and a shy smile. The truth was, she didn't know how to fit in with people who had been playing under tutors since they were 5. She had learned in a very different way, alone at home with an old upright piano that had belonged to her father. Every evening after her mother went to bed, she would practice for hours. The piano wasn't in great shape, some keys slightly off tune, but to her it was perfect. It was the sound of comfort. She didn't use sheet music most of the time. She learned by listening, by repeating what she heard and feeling her way through mistakes. Her father had been the one who first showed her the keys when she was a child. He used to tell her that music wasn't about showing off. It was about saying what words couldn't. Those moments were her favorite memories, and whenever she played now, she could almost feel him beside her. At school, though, she kept that part of herself hidden. She was afraid people would laugh if they knew she never had proper lessons. So when the teacher called on her again later that week, she played safe, sticking to the simple tunes she'd memorized. One afternoon, the teacher announced that he would be testing everyone's skill through a small in-class challenge. "I want to see how you handle something difficult," he said, walking toward the piano. "Music doesn't reward fear. You must learn to take risks." He began pulling out sheets of music from his folder and handing them around. When he reached the new girl, he paused for a second. Maybe it was her quietness that made him curious. Maybe he wanted to push her a little just to see what she could do. He gave her a different piece, one far more complicated than what the others received. It was a classical composition full of sharp transitions, fast fingerwork, and layered harmonies that required not only skill, but emotional depth. The other students looked at her with surprise. One whispered, "That's impossible for her," but the teacher ignored the comment. "You'll play this next class," he said. She stared at the notes as if reading a foreign language, but she only nodded. That night, she sat by her small window with the music sheet in front of her. The lamp flickered, casting a soft light on the paper. She studied the symbols carefully, tracing the lines with her finger, trying to imagine how it would sound. She didn't know how to read everything perfectly, but she listened to recordings online, matching each note she could find. Then she sat at her piano and began to play. The first attempts were rough. Her fingers stumbled, her timing was off, but she didn't stop. She played the same bars over and over again until her muscles remembered the movement. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and play from memory, letting instinct guide her. Her small room filled with sound long past midnight. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to understand the music, to feel what it was trying to say. By the end of the week, her fingers hurt and her back ached, but she could play it from start to finish. Not perfectly, but with emotion. Each mistake carried a piece of her effort, and each correct note felt like a quiet victory. When the day of the challenge came, the classroom buzzed with chatter. The students took turns performing while the teacher sat by his desk, taking notes. Some played confidently, some nervously, and applause followed each performance. When it was finally her turn, the room grew a little quieter. Everyone was curious to see how she'd handle it. She walked slowly to the piano, holding the sheet in both hands. Her palms were sweating. The teacher gave her a nod. "Begin when you're ready," he said. For a few seconds, she just stared at the keys. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers down. The first few notes came softly, hesitant, but then something inside her shifted. She remembered the nights at home, her father's old piano, the way he'd smile and say, "Don't think too much, just feel it." Her hands began to move more confidently. The rhythm built slowly, each phrase blending into the next. The class fell silent. The sound that filled the room wasn't perfect in the technical sense, but it was full of something deeper. Feeling, honesty, life. Her fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys, each note connecting to the next like a heartbeat. The teacher leaned forward slightly. His pen stopped moving. He had heard hundreds of performances, some flawless, others mechanical. But this was different. There was something raw about it, like a story unfolding without words. When she reached the final chord, her hands froze in the air for a moment before she let them rest in her lap. The room was still. Then a few students started clapping softly, unsure of what to say. The teacher didn't speak for several seconds. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he finally asked. She blinked, surprised by the question. "At home," she said quietly. "Who taught you?" "No one," she replied. "I just practiced." He studied her face, trying to read if she was being modest or serious. The room filled with murmurs again. Some students looked at her differently now, not with pity but with curiosity. The teacher cleared his throat. "That piece wasn't meant to be easy," he said. "You made mistakes, but you also did something most can't. You made it speak." Her cheeks turned red. She wasn't sure how to respond. She simply said, "Thank you," and returned to her seat. For the rest of the class, the teacher couldn't stop thinking about what he'd heard. The precision wasn't perfect, yet there was a strange maturity in her tone, a natural understanding of emotion. It reminded him of the reason he had fallen in love with music decades ago, before he became a teacher surrounded by deadlines and grading sheets. After everyone left, he found her sitting alone near the piano again, tracing the keys with her fingertips. He approached her slowly. "You have something special," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Don't hide it." She looked up, a little startled, and smiled shyly. "I just like playing," she said. He nodded. "Keep that feeling. Don't lose it." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her to her thoughts. That night when she got home, she told her mother about the challenge. Her mother smiled, proud but tired from work. "Your father would have been so happy to hear that," she said. The girl didn't reply right away. She sat at the piano, lifted the cover, and placed her hands on the keys. She began to play again. The same piece, but this time she wasn't nervous or afraid of being judged. She just played for the sound of it, for the memory it carried, for the quiet warmth it brought into the cold evening. Outside, the winter wind pressed gently against the window pane. Inside, her small room filled with the same music that had once been only a dream. She didn't know what would come next, but in that moment, she felt something clear and certain. She belonged to the music, and the music belonged to her. The following week began like any other, but something felt different in the classroom. The teacher noticed it first. Every time he looked at the new girl sitting in her usual corner seat, he felt a quiet curiosity stir inside him. There was something in her that he hadn't seen in years, a kind of silent hunger to learn. She didn't seek attention or praise, yet her eyes always followed the music. When the bell rang, he started class as usual. He walked around, correcting finger placements, adjusting tempo for those who rushed through their notes. But his mind kept returning to the performance from last week, the way that quiet girl had made an impossible piece come alive. Her hands were small, her technique imperfect, but she played like she understood something that couldn't be taught. After the class ended, he stopped her before she could leave. "Stay for a few minutes," he said. She froze for a moment, unsure if she was in trouble. The other students glanced back curiously as they packed their bags and left. When the room was empty, he sat at the piano and gestured for her to come closer. "Play that piece again," he said gently. She looked nervous but nodded. She placed her fingers on the keys, took a deep breath, and began. This time the room was quiet except for the sound of her music. The teacher watched closely, not just her fingers but her expression. She wasn't looking at the notes. She was feeling them. Every chord seemed to come from her heart. When she finished, her shoulders relaxed as though she'd been holding her breath the whole time. He didn't speak right away. Finally, he said, "You don't play like a student." She blinked in surprise. "I don't?" "No," he said. "You play like someone who's lived inside the music." Her lips curved into a shy smile, unsure if that was meant as a compliment or a lesson. He leaned back on the piano bench and folded his hands. "Tell me," he said, "how do you practice? Do you read the sheet first or listen to recordings?" "I listen," she said quietly. "I listen until I can feel what it wants to say. Then I try to find it on the piano." Her words made him pause. That was not how most students worked. They memorized, they counted beats, they analyzed scales. But this girl, she felt the sound before she played it. It reminded him of his early years before he became the kind of teacher who lived by rules and perfection. He smiled faintly. "That's not the usual method," he said. She lowered her eyes. "I know. I never learned the right way." "Sometimes," he said softly, "the right way isn't the only way." From that day on, he began watching her more closely, not to judge, but to understand. He noticed how she practiced when others weren't looking. During breaks, while the rest of the students chatted or checked their phones, she would quietly sit at the piano, going over a single section again and again until it sounded right. Other students started noticing too. Some whispered about how the teacher seemed unusually interested in her progress. A few were supportive, impressed by her talent. Others weren't as kind. They had spent years taking lessons, competing in recitals, and now this quiet newcomer was getting attention after just a few weeks. One afternoon, two of them passed her desk and made a comment just loud enough for her to hear. "Maybe she's pretending to be humble so the teacher feels sorry for her." She didn't respond. She only looked down at her notebook and continued writing. Inside, she felt a small sting, but she reminded herself why she was here. Not for praise, not for competition, but for music. Later that day, the teacher asked her to stay again. He placed another sheet in front of her. "Do you know this one?" he asked. She looked at it and shook her head. "No, sir." He smiled slightly. "Good, learn it by next week. Don't rush it. Take your time." When she got home that night, she spread the sheet on the table. The notes looked like a maze, but she wasn't scared of it. She turned on her small speaker, listened to a recording, and began practicing. The melody was faster than what she was used to, filled with sharp jumps and sudden changes. It sounded like a storm trapped inside a piano. She played late into the night, repeating sections until her hands felt numb. Her mother called from the other room, telling her to sleep, but she whispered, "Just 5 more minutes." Those minutes turned into hours. The room grew colder, her fingers slower, but she kept going. Each wrong note became a lesson, each right one a spark of joy. By the end of the week, she had it. Not perfect, but alive. That's what mattered to her. When the next class came, she was ready. The teacher called her up again. She walked slowly to the piano, feeling the same nervous flutter in her stomach. The students watched quietly, some out of curiosity, others out of jealousy. She began to play. The room filled with sound, sharp, fast, emotional. Her hands moved across the keys with surprising confidence. The melody rose and fell like a conversation between two hearts. There was no showiness in her style, just honesty. When she reached the last note, she looked up and saw something she hadn't seen before. Her classmates were clapping sincerely, even the ones who had whispered about her earlier. The teacher smiled. "That," he said softly, "is how music is supposed to feel." Her heart swelled with pride, but she only bowed her head and said, "Thank you." After class, the teacher approached her again. "You're improving faster than I expected," he said. "Would you like to stay after school a few times a week? I could help you prepare for the upcoming recital." Her eyes widened. "The winter recital?" "Yes," he said. "I think you should play." She hesitated. The recital was a big event. Parents, students, judges, even local musicians attended. She'd never played in front of a real audience before. The thought of hundreds of eyes on her made her stomach twist. "I don't think I'm ready," she said. He looked at her kindly. "No one ever thinks they're ready. But sometimes you have to trust the music to carry you." She went home that day with mixed feelings, fear and excitement tangled together. She sat by her piano again, staring at the keys, wondering if she could really do it. Over the next few weeks, she began staying late at school. The teacher guided her patiently, sometimes correcting her posture, sometimes explaining how to bring more emotion into the phrasing. He was strict but never harsh. He seemed to care, not just about how she played, but about how she felt when she played. During those quiet after-school sessions, she started opening up a little. She told him how her father used to play every night after dinner. She said she didn't have recordings of him, just memories of sitting beside him, watching his fingers dance on the keys. He listened silently, then said, "That explains it." "Explains what?" she asked. "The way you play. It's not just practice. It's love." His words stayed with her long after that day. Sometimes she made mistakes and frustration got the better of her. But instead of scolding, he reminded her that even wrong notes have meaning. "Music isn't about being perfect," he said. "It's about being honest." One evening, as they were finishing practice, another teacher peeked into the room and watched quietly. When the girl finished, the other teacher whispered, "She's special, isn't she?" Her teacher nodded slowly. "More than she knows." Outside, the snow had started falling softly against the windows. The academy looked peaceful in the fading light. As days passed, her confidence began to grow. Her classmates, once skeptical, started asking her for help with their own pieces. She was shy at first, unsure how to teach anyone, but she tried. She discovered she enjoyed helping others find their rhythm. The recital date drew closer and her nerves returned. Some nights, she couldn't sleep. She would wake up, sit by her piano, and play the piece again under the dim light. Each time, she added a little more heart to it, thinking about her father's words and her teacher's guidance. On the morning of the recital, she stood backstage trembling. Her teacher found her there, pale and quiet, her fingers twitching nervously. He smiled gently. "Breathe," he said. "You've already won, you just don't know it yet." She nodded, but her voice shook. "What if I forget?" "Then you close your eyes," he said, "and let your heart remember." When her turn came, she walked out to the stage. The lights were bright and the audience seemed endless. She sat at the piano, her hands resting on the cold keys. For a moment, she couldn't move. The silence felt heavy. Then she remembered the nights at home, the quiet room, her mother's voice telling her to rest, the way her father once said that music could speak when words failed. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but soon the sound filled the hall. It wasn't just a performance. It was a story. Her story. The audience leaned forward, drawn into the emotion behind every chord. Her teacher watched from the side, his eyes glistening with quiet pride. When she struck the final note, the hall stayed silent for a moment before breaking into applause. She stood slowly, her chest rising and falling with relief. The teacher joined her on stage, gave her a small nod, and whispered, "Beautiful." That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed every moment in her mind. The fear, the music, the applause. She smiled to herself. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider or a beginner. She felt like someone who belonged on that stage. The next day at school, everyone greeted her differently. Her classmates congratulated her. The principal stopped her in the hallway to praise her. And even the strictest teachers smiled at her. But what mattered most was that she finally believed in herself. The teacher saw her again that afternoon, sitting by the piano as usual. He walked over and said quietly, "That was only the beginning." She looked up, her eyes shining. "I want to keep learning," she said. He smiled. "Then we'll keep going." Outside, snow continued to fall gently, covering the world in white. Inside, the soft sound of the piano returned, steady, warm, and full of promise. After the recital, the academy seemed to look at her differently. The once quiet, unnoticed girl had become someone everyone now wanted to know. Whenever she walked into class, heads turned and people whispered softly about her performance. Some smiled kindly, others seemed curious, and a few looked like they were trying to figure out how she had done it, but she didn't let it change her. She still sat in the same seat near the back, still carried her old notebook, and still stayed behind after class to practice on the piano that no one else cared to use once lessons ended. To her, nothing had really changed, except that now the teacher would often pause by her side and listen for a moment before giving a small, approving nod. That quiet acknowledgement meant more to her than any applause ever could. One afternoon, after everyone had gone, she stayed behind to practice a new song. It wasn't one assigned in class, and it was something she had written herself. The melody was soft and a little sad, but it made her feel peaceful. She didn't notice that the teacher was standing outside the room listening. When she finished, he clapped lightly and she turned around startled. "That was yours, wasn't it?" he asked. She nodded shyly. "Play it again," he said, walking closer. "I want to hear it properly." She hesitated. "It's not finished yet." "Good," he said with a small smile. "Then let's see where it takes you." She started playing again, and he sat beside the piano, eyes closed, listening carefully. The melody rose and fell like a quiet conversation. When she finished, he didn't say anything for a moment. Finally, he opened his eyes and said softly, "That piece has something special. It's not perfect, but it has truth." She smiled, unsure how to respond. "I just play what I feel," she said. "And that," he replied, "is what real musicians do." From that day, he started giving her small challenges. Not just classical pieces, but songs that required emotion, improvisation, and imagination. He wanted to see how far she could go when she wasn't bound by rules. Some days he asked her to listen to a piece only once and then play it back from memory. Other times he asked her to change the ending of a melody to make it her own. Every time she surprised him with how naturally she adapted. The teacher had been in music for decades, and yet there was something about this girl that reignited his passion. He began to stay late after classes too, helping her refine her sound, teaching her about composers, and showing her how to express more through her fingers than through technique alone. He wasn't the only one who noticed her growth. The academy's director, an older woman who rarely attended student practices, happened to pass by one evening and stopped outside the classroom, drawn by the sound of the piano. After listening for a few minutes, she stepped inside and said, "Who's playing?" The teacher turned to her. "One of my students. She sounds extraordinary," the director said. "How long has she been training here?" "Barely 2 months," the teacher replied. The director raised her eyebrows. 2 months? Are you serious?" He nodded. "She's different. She doesn't just play notes. She tells stories." The director listened again, smiling faintly. "Keep working with her. There might be something bigger waiting for that girl." The teacher knew she was right. He had a feeling that her story was only beginning. In the following weeks, he began preparing her for something new, the regional piano showcase. It wasn't just a school event. It brought together young musicians from across the city. Many of the students at the academy had dreamed of being chosen to represent their school, but the teacher only selected one each year. When he told her about it, she froze. "Me?" she asked, pointing to herself as if she couldn't believe it. "Yes," he said simply. "But there are better students. They know more theory. They've been here longer," he smiled. "That may be true, but no one plays like you do." She didn't know what to say. The idea of performing in front of strangers, professional judges, and musicians from other schools made her nervous. But she also felt a spark of excitement she couldn't ignore. That night, she sat by her piano, staring at the keys. The thought of representing the academy scared her. But something inside her whispered that maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe this was where her father's lessons and her late-night practices were leading her. She began working harder than ever. Every day after school, she practiced until her fingers trembled. The teacher guided her with patience, sometimes strict but always encouraging. "Don't chase speed," he would say. "Chase meaning." There were days she got frustrated. Some passages were too fast, too complex, and she felt like she would never get them right. Once, after making the same mistake 5 times in a row, she dropped her hands on the keys and sighed deeply. He looked at her and said, "Do you know why music is beautiful?" She shook her head. "Because it forgives," he said. "You can start over as many times as you need. Every wrong note teaches you something." She smiled faintly and tried again. This time the notes flowed better. One evening, as she was finishing practice, one of her classmates came in. He was one of the top students, confident and skilled. He leaned against the doorframe and said, "You're playing in the showcase, right?" She nodded cautiously. "I heard about that," he said. "You know, most of us trained for years to get a chance like this." "I know," she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment and then said, "Well, don't mess it up." It wasn't said kindly, but she didn't let it bother her. Instead, it pushed her to work even harder. She wanted to prove that her place wasn't luck, it was earned. The teacher noticed her determination growing day by day. "You've changed," he said one afternoon. "You used to play softly, like you were afraid of being heard. Now you play like you want the world to listen." She smiled shyly. "Maybe I do." As the showcase drew closer, the pressure built. Posters went up. Families started talking about it, and even the students who weren't performing were excited to attend. The night before the event, she barely slept. She sat by her piano again, playing her chosen piece one last time. When she finished, she looked up at the framed photo of her father on the shelf. "I hope I make you proud," she whispered. The next day, the academy bus took the participants to the concert hall. The building was huge, filled with lights and the low hum of voices. Dozens of students from other schools were already there, dressed neatly, carrying sheet music and warming up on smaller pianos backstage. When she walked in, her stomach tightened. Everyone looked so confident. Her teacher placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and said, "Remember, you're not here to compete. You're here to share your gift. Play for yourself." She nodded, though her heart was pounding. When it was finally her turn, she stepped onto the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, but she could feel their presence. Hundreds of eyes waiting. She sat down, took a deep breath, and pressed the first key. The sound was clear, pure. She began to play. At first, her hands trembled slightly, but then she found her rhythm. The music took over. The melody flowed through her body moving gently with each phrase. Every note carried emotion, joy, sadness, longing, all blended together like colors on a canvas. The judges watched silently, one of them leaning forward, his pen forgotten. The audience grew still. There was something about the way she played that felt deeply personal, as if she was telling a story they couldn't quite name but could all feel. When she reached the final part, she closed her eyes and let the sound rise and fade softly. The hall remained silent for a long second before applause broke out. Loud, heartfelt, unstoppable. Her teacher stood at the side of the stage, clapping too, his eyes shining with quiet pride. When she stood and bowed, she felt her hands shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from joy. She had done it. After the performance, people came up to her backstage, other students, teachers, even one of the judges, to compliment her. They asked where she had trained, who her instructor was, and how long she'd been playing. When they learned she was mostly self-taught, they were astonished. Her teacher stood nearby, smiling as he listened. When the crowd finally thinned, he said, "You've proven something important today." "What's that?" she asked. "That talent doesn't always come from lessons or books. Sometimes it's born from love." She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you. For believing in me." He shook his head softly. "No. Thank you for reminding me why I started teaching." As they left the concert hall that night, snow was falling again, just like the first week she'd joined the academy. The cold air touched her face, but inside she felt warm, alive, and full of hope. She looked at her teacher and said quietly, "What should I play next?" He laughed gently. "Something you can't yet imagine," he replied. And as they walked through the snowy street, her heart beat with a rhythm she would remember forever, the rhythm of discovery, courage, and the beginning of something truly extraordinary. When the class ended that day, the air still felt heavy with surprise. The teacher sat at his desk, pretending to organize papers, but his mind kept drifting back to what he had just witnessed. He couldn't stop hearing those notes. The way the girl had played was unlike anything he had seen in years of teaching. There was power, but also something deeply emotional in every sound she made. He knew that kind of connection to music didn't come from training alone. It came from life, from feeling, from something deeper. As the other students left, talking quietly about what had just happened, the girl started packing her things. She moved slowly, almost shyly, as if she didn't want anyone to notice her. The teacher called her name softly, asking her to stay for a moment. She stopped, hesitated for a second, and then walked over. He told her he wanted to talk about her performance, that he had never seen such natural skill before. She lowered her eyes and shrugged. It wasn't the reaction he expected. There was no pride in her face, no sign that she thought what she did was special. It was as if she didn't even realize how extraordinary she was. He asked where she learned to play. She said quietly, "At home." Her voice was almost a whisper, but it carried something heavy behind it. He leaned forward slightly, curious. "Did someone teach you?" She shook her head. "No, I just listened." He frowned a little, not because he doubted her, but because he wanted to understand. "Listen to what?" "To my father," she said. "He used to play every night. I'd sit beside him and watch. After he was gone, I kept playing the way he did." The teacher sat back in silence. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. It was a simple answer, but it explained so much. Every note she played earlier had carried emotion, grief, and love. It made sense now. Music wasn't something she learned from books or teachers. It was something she inherited through memories. He noticed her hands then, resting on her lap. They were small, but there was a quiet strength in them. The kind of strength that comes from years of practice, even if it was done alone. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Since I was little, but not every day, just when I felt like it." He smiled faintly. "And how often was that?" She looked down, a hint of a shy smile appearing for the first time. "Almost every day." The teacher couldn't help but laugh softly. "That explains a lot," he said. For a while, neither of them spoke. The classroom was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. The teacher could feel that this girl had something rare. Not just talent, but a natural understanding of music that couldn't be taught. He wanted to know more, not just about how she played, but about who she was. He asked her what made her choose that particular piece today. It wasn't something students usually picked. It was difficult, complex, full of emotion. She said she didn't really choose it. She just felt it. When the teacher mentioned it earlier as a challenge, something inside her told her to try. "It sounded like something my father used to play," she said softly. The teacher's chest tightened a little. He could imagine a small girl sitting in a dimly lit room, listening to her father play, memorizing the rhythm and the feel of the keys. Music wasn't just sound to her. It was a memory, a piece of her past that she kept alive. He asked if she still had that piano at home. She nodded. "It's old now. Some keys don't work anymore, but I still play it." He looked at her for a moment, trying to imagine the picture in his mind, the old piano, the quiet room, the sound of broken keys mixed with perfect melodies. There was something beautiful about it. "You know," he said gently, "what you have is very rare. Most people spend years trying to learn what you already understand without being taught. You don't just play notes, you tell stories with them." The girl didn't say anything, but he could tell she understood what he meant. Her eyes, usually shy and downcast, had a spark in them now. Maybe for the first time she felt seen. He then asked if she had ever performed anywhere before. She shook her head. "Never. Not even once?" "No," she said. "I only play when I'm alone. It feels strange when people watch me." The teacher nodded. "That's normal. Many great musicians felt the same way when they started, but I think you should share your gift. You have something that could move people." She looked uncertain, like she didn't believe she was ready for that. The teacher didn't push. Instead, he smiled and said, "How about this? Why don't you come to the music room tomorrow after class? I'd like to hear you play again. No audience, just you and me." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay." That night, the teacher couldn't stop thinking about her. He kept replaying her performance in his mind, the way her fingers moved effortlessly, the emotion in her sound. He even stayed up late, going through old recordings of famous pianists, wondering if he had ever heard anything that raw and honest. But none of them felt quite the same. This girl wasn't just skilled. She had something that couldn't be described, something almost spiritual. The next day, she came to the music room as promised. She seemed nervous but ready. The teacher encouraged her to sit at the piano and just play whatever she wanted. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hands on the keys and began to play a soft, unfamiliar melody. It wasn't any song he recognized. It was something she had made herself. The notes were gentle and sad at first, then slowly grew stronger. The teacher stood quietly watching her. He could see that she wasn't just pressing keys, she was speaking through them. Each sound told a story of loss and love, of quiet nights spent remembering someone who was gone. When she finished, the teacher's eyes were slightly wet. He clapped softly, not to praise her, but to honor the moment. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Did you write that yourself?" She nodded. "It just came to me," he smiled. "You have the heart of a composer. Do you know that?" She shook her head. "I just play what I feel." He looked at her thoughtfully. "That's exactly what great composers do." From that day on, he started working with her more closely. It wasn't about teaching her in the usual way. She didn't need lessons on technique or scales. She already had those naturally. Instead, he helped her understand how to read complex music sheets, how to interpret classical pieces, and how to bring her emotions into structure. It became their routine. After school, she would come to the music room and they would play together for hours. Sometimes they'd go through famous compositions, and other times she would create something entirely new. Each day, the teacher grew more amazed by her natural sense of timing, her memory, and her ability to connect with the piano like it was part of her. One afternoon, while she played, the teacher closed his eyes. The sound filled the room, and for a moment he was taken back to his own youth, when he had first fallen in love with music. He realized that somewhere along the years, teaching and routine had made him forget that feeling. But listening to her play brought it all back. When she stopped, he said softly, "You remind me why I became a musician." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. But he could see in her face that she understood the weight of those words. As the days went on, her confidence started to grow. She still spoke little, but her music became stronger, more expressive. She started playing in front of small groups of students, at the teacher's gentle encouragement. At first, she would tremble slightly when she sat down, but once her hands touched the piano, everything else disappeared. The teacher began to wonder if she should enter a competition. There was one coming up, a regional piano event for young musicians. It was the kind of stage that could change someone's life. But he also knew she was fragile, and he didn't want to push too hard. So one day, while they were packing up, he said carefully, "There's a competition next month. No pressure, but I think you'd do really well if you tried." She froze for a moment, thinking. "A competition?" She repeated quietly. He nodded. "Yes, it's not about winning. It's about sharing what you have. People should hear you." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the piano for a long time. Finally, she said, "I'll think about it." He didn't mention it again after that. He wanted it to be her decision. But he noticed how she began practicing longer each day. Sometimes when he entered the room, she was already there, playing softly, lost in her world. A week later, she told him she wanted to do it. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was determination in her eyes. "If I can play for my father, maybe I can play for others too," she said. The teacher smiled warmly. "That's the spirit," he said. "We'll start preparing." From then on, their lessons became more intense. He helped her polish her performance, not to make it flawless, but to make it true. He reminded her again and again, "Don't just play with your fingers. Play with your heart." Every time she practiced, he could see her growing, not just as a musician, but as a person. The shy girl who once avoided attention was slowly finding her voice through the piano. And deep inside, the teacher knew this was only the beginning. What started as a simple classroom challenge had turned into something much bigger, a journey of discovery, healing, and music that would soon touch many hearts beyond their small school walls. The days passed quickly after she agreed to take part in the competition. Each afternoon, she came to the music room, her small notebook tucked under her arm and a quiet determination in her eyes. The teacher had seen many students prepare for performances before, but there was something different about her. She wasn't chasing attention or applause. She was chasing connection. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being true to herself and to the music she carried inside. From the very first day of practice, the teacher could feel how serious she was. She would sit down at the piano, close her eyes for a few seconds, and take a deep breath before starting. Every note she played seemed to come from somewhere deeper than skill. It came from emotion, from memory, from love. But even though she had talent beyond her years, there were struggles too. Sometimes she would stop suddenly, frown, and shake her head as if the sound wasn't right. She would sigh quietly and start over again. The teacher could see that she wasn't just fighting to perfect her music. She was also fighting something inside herself. One evening, after she had played through the same piece 3 times, the teacher stopped her gently. "You're pushing too hard," he said softly. "What's wrong?" She kept her eyes on the piano keys and said, "It's not coming out the way I feel it. I know what it should sound like, but when I play it feels empty." The teacher nodded slowly. He understood that frustration too well. "You can't force it," he said. "Sometimes music doesn't come from pressure, it comes from peace. Try to remember why you play in the first place." She looked up at him and her eyes softened. "Because of my father," she whispered. He smiled. "Then play for him, not for the judges. Don't worry about right or wrong notes. Let him hear you again." She stared at the piano for a moment, then nodded. She started playing once more, this time slower, gentler. The melody that came out was raw, almost fragile, but beautiful. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of feeling. The teacher didn't say a word until she finished. Then he smiled and said, "That's it. That's what makes people listen." After that day, her playing began to change. It wasn't just strong, it was alive. She learned to let go of her fear and trust herself. The teacher could see that confidence slowly building each time she sat at the piano. He began to believe she might actually surprise everyone at the competition, not just because of her skill, but because of her heart. Still, there were days when her nerves got the best of her. As the competition drew closer, she became quieter than usual. She'd sit in front of the piano, hands trembling slightly before she even began. The teacher tried to reassure her, reminding her how far she had come. But she would only nod, never fully smiling. One afternoon, he decided to take a different approach. Instead of another long practice, he told her to stop playing for the day. She looked at him in surprise. "But I need to practice," she said quickly. He smiled. "Sometimes the best practice is to stop for a while. Come with me." He led her out of the music room and across the courtyard, where the air was filled with the sound of birds and the faint hum of traffic from the street. They sat on a bench under a tree. The teacher looked at her and said, "Do you know why I love music?" She shook her head. He smiled faintly. "Because music never lies. You can fake words, fake smiles, fake confidence, but not music. When you play, it shows everything you feel inside. That's why I told you to stop pushing so hard. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to be honest with your music." She thought about his words for a while. Then she asked quietly, "Were you ever scared to play?" He nodded. "Of course. I used to tremble so badly I could barely press the keys. But one day my teacher told me something that changed everything. He said, 'Fear doesn't disappear, it becomes part of your music. You can't escape it, but you can turn it into something beautiful.'" She looked down at her hands and whispered, "I think I understand." When she returned to the piano later that day, something had shifted. Her fingers still shook a little, but she didn't try to fight it. She let the emotion come through her playing, and what came out was breathtaking. The teacher watched quietly, knowing that this was the moment she had finally found her own voice. As the days went by, the bond between them grew stronger. He was no longer just her teacher. He became a mentor, almost like the guiding figure she needed after losing her father. Sometimes they would talk for hours after practice, not about music, but about life, dreams, and the small moments that made everything worth it. One day, the teacher brought her an old sheet of music. The paper was yellowed and torn at the edges. "This belonged to my teacher," he said. "It's a simple piece, but it taught me something important. I think it might help you too." She took it carefully, her eyes tracing the faded notes. "What's it called?" "It doesn't really have a name," he said with a smile. "It's just something meant to be played from the heart." She practiced that piece every day for the next week, and each time it sounded different. Sometimes soft, sometimes intense, but always honest. It became her way of calming herself when nerves crept in. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. The hall was filled with people, Students, teachers, families, and judges. The teacher stood beside her backstage, watching her pace nervously. Her hands were cold and she kept rubbing them together. "You'll be fine," he said calmly. "Just remember what we talked about. Don't play for them. Play for the person who first taught you what music feels like." She nodded, taking a deep breath. When her name was called, she walked out slowly, her steps light but uncertain. The stage lights were bright and the crowd seemed endless. She sat at the piano, stared at the keys for a long moment, and then closed her eyes. For a few seconds there was complete silence. Then her fingers began to move. The first notes floated softly through the air, delicate and full of emotion. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. Every sound seemed to tell a story, of a little girl sitting beside her father, of loss, of finding strength, of hope. The teacher watched from the side of the stage, his heart swelling with pride. Halfway through, something unexpected happened. One of the piano strings snapped faintly. The sound was barely noticeable, but she heard it. For a second she froze. The teacher held his breath, fearing she might stop, but she didn't. She kept playing, adjusting the rhythm slightly, covering the broken note with another tone, and somehow making the piece sound even more beautiful. The small mistake had turned into magic. The audience didn't even realize something had gone wrong. They only felt the emotion pouring from her music. When she struck the final note, there was silence again. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room erupted into applause. Some people even stood up. The teacher felt a lump in his throat. He had seen many performances before, but this was something else. It wasn't just skill, it was soul. She stood slowly, her face pale but glowing. She bowed, then looked toward the side of the stage where her teacher stood. Their eyes met and she smiled for the first time that day. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, grateful one, but it said everything. After the performance, people came to congratulate her. The judges praised her interpretation and her emotional depth. One of them even said, "It's rare to see such feeling in someone so young." She listened politely, but her eyes kept searching for the teacher. When she finally found him, he didn't say anything at first. He just nodded proudly. "You did it," he said quietly. She smiled shyly. "I thought I ruined it when the string broke." He shook his head. "No, you made it even better. That moment showed who you really are, not just a pianist, but an artist." She looked down, her eyes glistening. "I just wanted him to hear it," she whispered. The teacher understood. "He did," he said softly. Later that night, after everyone had left and the lights in the hall were dimmed, she returned to the stage alone. She sat at the piano again, her fingers tracing the keys gently. Then she played her father's favorite melody, slow, peaceful, filled with love. It wasn't part of the competition, but it was something she needed to do for herself. The teacher watched from the doorway without saying a word. He knew that this moment was hers alone. The music drifted through the empty hall, echoing softly against the walls. It was both an ending and a beginning. When she finished, she looked up and saw him standing there. "Thank you," she said quietly. He smiled. "Don't thank me. You found this music on your own. I just helped you see it." She nodded, her eyes shining. "Still, I couldn't have done it without you." He stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Remember this feeling," he said. "No matter what happens in life, whenever you sit at a piano, this is what will bring you peace." She nodded again, her heart full. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud, not because of the applause or the praise, but because she had faced her fear and shared something real. That night, as she walked home under the quiet sky, she thought about everything that had happened, the challenge, the long hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the teacher's constant guidance. Every step of the way had shaped her into the person she was now, and deep down she knew this was only the beginning of her story. The music that had once been just a memory of her father had now become her own voice, something she could share with the world. The morning after the competition, the sunlight streamed gently through the music room windows. The teacher was already there, sipping his coffee slowly, the faint sound of the piano still echoing in his mind from the night before. It was hard to believe what he had witnessed. The shy, quiet girl who once could barely meet his eyes had stood in front of hundreds of people and played like someone born for the stage. He kept smiling to himself as he thought about it. There was something unforgettable about the way she had played, especially after that small accident when the string snapped. Most performers would have panicked, stopped, or broken down, but she had done the opposite. She had turned it into something beautiful. It was the kind of moment that no teacher could plan or teach. It just happened when someone's heart took over. A few minutes later, he heard the sound of the door opening. She walked in quietly, holding her small bag and a folded piece of paper. She looked calm, though her eyes still carried the traces of last night's emotions. The teacher stood up and smiled. "I didn't expect to see you so early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied softly. "I wanted to come here one more time before class starts." He nodded, understanding. "I know the feeling. After something like that, it's hard to go back to normal right away." She walked over to the piano and sat down slowly. Her fingers brushed over the keys like she was greeting an old friend. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The room was filled with silence, the kind that isn't empty but peaceful. Then she unfolded the paper she was holding and placed it gently on the piano. "This came this morning," she said. The teacher leaned closer and saw it was a letter from the competition committee. He glanced at her, waiting for her to say something, but she only smiled. "I got first place," she said simply. The teacher couldn't help but laugh softly, more out of joy than surprise. "I knew you would," he said proudly. "You earned it." She looked down, a small smile touching her lips. "I didn't think I would. I just wanted to play for him." The teacher nodded. "And you did. That's why you won. You didn't play for the judges or the crowd. You played with your heart." For a long time they sat in quiet happiness. It wasn't the kind of excitement that came with trophies or applause. It was the quiet kind that comes from knowing you've done something real. A little later, the teacher reached into his desk drawer and took out a small box. "I've been meaning to give you this," he said. She looked curious. He handed her the box, and when she opened it, she found a small silver keychain shaped like a treble clef. It was simple but elegant. "It was my teacher's," he said. "He gave it to me after my first big performance. I think it's time to pass it on." Her eyes widened a little. "But this is yours," he smiled gently. "It was, but now it's yours. You remind me of the reason I fell in love with music in the first place. I want you to keep it. Not as a prize, but as a reminder that what you have is rare." She looked at the keychain for a long moment, then closed her fingers around it carefully. "Thank you," she said softly. "Promise me something," the teacher added. "No matter where you go or how far you go, don't let anyone make you forget what music means to you. It's not about fame or perfection, it's about truth." She nodded slowly. "I promise." The next few weeks passed quickly. Her story spread quietly around the school. Students who had once overlooked her now greeted her with admiration. Some asked for tips, others simply congratulated her, but she never changed. She still came early to the music room, still practiced quietly, still played as if no one was watching. The teacher noticed that something about her had grown. Her posture was more confident, her smile more open. She had learned that courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about playing through the fear. One afternoon, as they sat together in the music room, she asked a question that made the teacher pause. "Do you ever think about what music means when there's no one to listen?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I think that's when it means the most. Because then it's just for you," she smiled faintly. "That's how I feel when I play alone." He nodded. "That's exactly what makes your music special." As the school year went on, she began helping younger students who struggled with the piano. She was patient with them, kind in a way that reminded the teacher of how she had once been, quiet, nervous, unsure. She never raised her voice or showed frustration. She would simply sit beside them and say, "Try again. Close your eyes and feel the sound." Watching her teach made the teacher feel proud in a different way. He could see how she was slowly becoming what she was meant to be, not just a pianist, but someone who understood the real power of music. One day, she brought an old photograph to class. It was of her father sitting at the piano, smiling faintly at the camera. The edges of the picture were faded, but the feeling in it was clear. She placed it on the piano while she played, as if she wanted him to be there with her. The teacher noticed but didn't say anything. He simply watched as she played a new melody, something she had been working on herself. It was soft and full of emotion, with traces of sadness but also light. When she finished, she looked up shyly. "I think I want to write my own music," she said, The teacher smiled widely. I think you already are. He began helping her with composition, teaching her how to write down the sounds she heard in her mind, how to turn feelings into notes on a page. At first it was difficult for her. She was used to playing by ear, not writing. But slowly she began to understand it. Each day she came with new ideas, melodies that told stories only she could tell. Months later, she finished her first full piece. It was gentle, filled with pauses and rises that captured her whole journey. From the shy girl who hid in the back of the classroom to the musician who played from her heart. She named it Echoes of Home. When she played it for the first time in front of the teacher, the room went completely still. Every note seemed to carry her past and her present together, the sound of her father's piano, the lessons she had learned, and the quiet encouragement that had guided her here. When she finished, the teacher's voice was low and full of emotion. That's beautiful, he said. You've found your own sound. She looked down, blushing a little. I just wanted it to feel like... Remembering, he nodded. It does. A few weeks later, the academy held a small concert for its students. This time she wasn't nervous. When she stepped onto the stage, she carried herself with quiet confidence. The lights didn't scare her anymore. They felt like part of the music. Before she began, she said softly to the audience, "This is something I wrote myself." And then she started playing. The melody filled the hall, warm and emotional. People listened in silence, completely drawn in. There was no showmanship, no attempt to impress, just pure, honest sound. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. But she didn't smile until she looked over and saw her teacher in the crowd, clapping with quiet pride. After the concert, as people left the hall, the teacher found her near the piano. She looked both happy and thoughtful. You did wonderfully, he said. Thank you, she replied. It felt different this time, like it wasn't about proving anything. It was just sharing something I love, he smiled. That's exactly what music is supposed to be. As the months turned into years, she continued to grow. She began composing more, even helping the academy with small performances and mentoring other students. Her life wasn't about fame or competition. It was about connection. People started noticing her talent beyond the academy, and she was invited to perform in nearby towns. But no matter how far she went, she always came back to the same piano, the one where it had all begun. Sometimes, she would walk into the music room after everyone had left, sit alone and play softly into the quiet. The teacher would often listen from outside, not wanting to interrupt. The melodies she played were full of maturity and peace. She no longer played from pain or loss. She played from gratitude. One evening, after she finished playing, the teacher finally walked in. You know, he said, when I first saw you sitting in that corner months ago, I never imagined you would change my life as much as I've changed yours. She looked surprised. Change your life? He nodded. Yes, you reminded me that music isn't just something to teach. It's something to feel again. She smiled softly. Then maybe we helped each other. He chuckled. Maybe we did. That night, as she left the room, she paused at the door and looked back at the piano. The lights reflected off the keys, and for a moment she imagined her father sitting there again, smiling. She whispered a quiet thank you to the empty room and closed the door gently behind her. The teacher watched her go, feeling a sense of peace. He knew she would go on to do great things, not because of fame or awards, but because she played with honesty, and somewhere, in every note she would play in the years to come, a part of that old classroom, that teacher, and her father's memory would live on forever.